Welcome to Raw Tales Africa. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications because it will mean the whole world to me. Now, let's get right into the story. The scorching Lagos sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty road outside Emerald Crown Academy as 15-year-old Kemi balanced a heavy tray of pure water sachets on her head. Her faded blue dress, patched at the sleeves, clung to her thin frame as sweat dripped down her face. Her bare feet, hardened by months of walking on hot asphalt, carried her toward the imposing gates of the most prestigious private school in Victoria Island. "Pure water, cold pure water," she called out in a clear, melodious voice, but her eyes remained focused, her head filled with a quiet dignity that poverty couldn't touch. Just then, the school gates burst open, and a group of students in crisp white uniforms poured out, their expensive bags slung over their shoulders, designer watches glinting in the sunlight. At the center of the group strutted Biodun Adebayo, the 17-year-old son of a prominent politician, his chest puffed with arrogance and his eyes cold with entitlement. "Look what we have here," Biodun sneered, his voice dripping with mockery as he spotted Kemi, a dirty street rat selling water outside our school. Disgusting. His followers, Temi, Fumi, and Dayo, laughed on cue, their expensive phones already out, ready to capture whatever cruelty their leader had planned. Kemi paused, her heart sinking, but she kept her head high. "Please, sir, I am just trying to make an honest living," Kemi said softly, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. Biodun's laughter was harsh and cutting. "Honest living? You are nothing but a beggar polluting our environment. How dare you even stand near our school?" He reached into his designer backpack and pulled out a bottle of imported water worth more than Kemi made in a week. With deliberate malice, he unscrewed the cap and poured the entire contents onto the dusty ground, the water forming a muddy puddle at Kemi's feet. "This is what your cheap water is worth," he spat. "Nothing. Just like you." Temi giggled, pointing her phone at Kemi's shocked face. "This is going straight to TikTok. Poor girl gets reality check from her betters." The other students gathered around, some laughing, others filming, a few looking uncomfortable but saying nothing. A small crowd of passers-by stopped to watch, some shaking their heads in disapproval, others pulling out their phones to record the humiliation. Kemi stood frozen, the weight of the water tray on her head suddenly feeling like a mountain. Tears threatened to spill from her eyes, but she blinked them back. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. "You think you're better than me because your father has money?" Kemi asked quietly, her voice carrying a strength that surprised even her. Biodun's eyes flashed with fury. "I don't think it. I know it. My father owns half of Lagos. What does yours own? A wheelbarrow? A bicycle?" His friends erupted in laughter again. But there was something in Kemi's eyes, a flash of knowing, a glimpse of power that she quickly concealed. She adjusted the tray on her head and took a step back. "We shall see," she whispered, so softly that only Biodun heard. Then louder, "I pray God forgives you for your cruelty." "God?" Biodun scoffed. "God helps those who help themselves. And clearly, he is not helping you." He turned to his friends. "Come on, let's go. The smell of poverty is making me sick." As they walked away, their laughter echoing down the street, Kemi remained standing in the same spot, the muddy water at her feet reflecting the sky above. She closed her eyes for a moment, took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "If only you knew, Biodun Adebayo. If only you knew." But this story didn't start with that humiliation. It started 3 months earlier in a penthouse office overlooking the very streets where Kemi now sold water. 3 months earlier, in the gleaming boardroom of Adeyemi Holdings, one of Nigeria's largest conglomerates, a heated discussion was taking place. The massive table was surrounded by men in expensive suits, their voices rising and falling as they debated the future of several educational institutions. At the head of the table sat Chief Adeyemi Okonkwo, a man whose presence commanded respect. His graying beard was neatly trimmed, his eyes sharp with intelligence, and his voice carried the weight of decades of business success. But today, his face was etched with concern. "The reports are troubling, Chief," said Mr. Bankole, the company's head of acquisitions. Emerald Crown Academy may be prestigious, but the character of its students is questionable. There have been numerous complaints about bullying, entitlement, and a complete lack of moral education. Chief Okonkwo leaned back in his leather chair, his fingers stippled, and yet, we have just acquired it. The question is, how do we transform it? We could implement new policies, suggested Mrs. Adebola, the education consultant. Hire new staff, create character-building programs. Policies on paper mean nothing if the rot runs deep, Chief Okonkwo replied thoughtfully. To truly understand the problem, sometimes you must see it from the ground up. He paused, his eyes distant as if formulating a plan. I want to conduct an experiment. A social experiment that will reveal the true character of these children and their parents. The room fell silent, waiting for him to continue. My daughter will go undercover. She will present herself as a street hawker, someone the students will typically look down upon. We'll observe how they treat someone they perceive as beneath them. Only then will we know the extent of the work needed. Mr. Bankole frowned. Chief, with all due respect, that seems dangerous. Your daughter is accustomed to privilege. Can she handle such treatment? A small smile played at the corners of Chief Okonkwo's mouth. You underestimate Kemi. She has been asking to understand the real world, to experience life beyond our gates. This will be our education and theirs. Meanwhile, in another wing of the same building, 15-year-old Kemi Okonkwo sat in her father's private study, surrounded by books and achievement awards. She was reviewing financial reports, not for school, but because she genuinely enjoyed understanding how businesses operated. Her father had been grooming her to take over the empire since she was 12, and she absorbed knowledge like a sponge. Unlike most children of wealthy families, Kemi had always been curious about life outside her privileged bubble. She volunteered at orphanages, visited rural communities with her father's charity foundation, and often questioned why some people had so much while others had so little. When her father presented the undercover idea to her that evening, her eyes lit up with excitement and purpose. I want to do it, Daddy, she said without hesitation. I want to see who these people really are when they think no one important is watching. Chief Okonkwo studied his daughter's face. It won't be easy, Kemi. They will treat you cruelly. They will say things that will hurt your heart. Are you prepared for that? Kemi is just set with determination. If that is what pure people face every day, then I need to understand it. How can I lead fairly if I don't know what injustice feels like? And so, the plan was set in motion. Kemi would spend 3 months living modestly in a small apartment in Surulere, selling water and snacks near Emerald Crown Academy. She would observe, document, and report back on the character of the students and staff. It was an unusual form of due diligence, but Chief Okonkwo believed it was necessary. What he didn't anticipate was how much the experience would change his daughter and how dramatically it would expose the rots he suspected existed in the school he now owned. The transition from penthouse to one-bedroom apartment was jarring, even for someone as mentally prepared as Kemi. The small flat in Surulere had basic furniture, a tiny kitchen, and walls so thin she could hear her neighbors' conversations. But it wasn't the physical discomfort that struck her most. It was the immediate change in how the world treated her. On her first day, dressed in simple worn clothes and carrying a tray of pure water, Kemi walked through the streets of Lagos with new eyes. People who would have bowed and scraped before Miss Kemi Okonkwo now barely glanced at Kemi the water seller. It was both liberating and sobering. She had chosen to operate near Emerald Crown Academy deliberately. Her father's intelligence suggested that the worst behavior occurred right at the school gates, where students felt most emboldened by their environment and peer pressure. Her first encounter with the students happened on a Tuesday morning. She was walking past the school when the gates opened for break time. A group of junior students, around 13 and 14 years old, came running out. "Water! Pure water!" Kemi called out, her voice clear and hopeful. A young girl called Folake approached her, but before she could make a purchase, an older boy, she would later learn his name was Shegun, grabbed the girl's arm. "Don't buy from her," he said loudly. "These street people water their products with dirty water. You will get cholera." Kemi's heart sank, but she kept her voice steady. "Sir, my water comes from the same factory as the ones in your school canteen. It is perfectly safe." Shegun laughed mockingly. Listen to her trying to sound educated. "What next? Will you tell us you went to university?" The other students giggled and Folake backed away, embarrassed. Kemi watched the potential sale disappear, along with her first illusion about this school. They weren't just privileged, they were cruel. But the real revelation came when she started observing their behavior toward other service providers. She watched them refuse to pay a pure water seller his correct change, claiming they didn't have smaller notes. She saw them deliberately drop trash for the school cleaner to pick up, laughing as the elderly man bent to clean up their mess. She witnessed them mocking a food vendor's accent and refusing to buy from her because her appearance wasn't clean enough. Each incident was a masterclass in casual cruelty, the kind that comes from never having to face consequences for one's actions. What disturbed Kemi most was how the adults, teachers, security guards, even some parents, either ignored the behavior or worse, enabled it. She watched a teacher laugh when a student made fun of a cobbler's appearance. She saw a parent tip her driver to make sure that dirty woman doesn't come near her car when referring to an elderly fruit seller. The pattern was clear. These children were learning that money gave them the right to dehumanize others, and the lesson was being reinforced by every adult in their lives. After 2 weeks of observation, Kemi had filled 3 notebooks with incidents, but she needed to experience the treatment firsthand to truly understand its impact. That's when she decided to make herself more visible, to deliberately put herself in situations where she would interact with the worst of them. It didn't take long for her to encounter Biodun Adebayo. Biodun Adebayo was 17 years old and believed himself to be the king of Emerald Crown Academy. His father, Honorable Adebayo, was a state commissioner with political ambitions and unlimited funds to indulge his son's every whim. Biodun drove to school in a Mercedes Benz, with a driver of course, wore a Rolex that cost more than most people's annual salary, and treated anyone beneath his social status like insects. But Biodun's cruelty wasn't random. It was calculated. He had learned from his father that power meant never having to consider other people's feelings, and he practiced this philosophy daily at school. His inner circle consisted of 3 equally privileged students: Temi Ogundimu, whose mother owned a chain of luxury boutiques; Fumi Adeleke, whose father was a bank CEO; and Dayo Fashola, whose family controlled several oil and gas companies. Together, they formed a hierarchy of cruelty that trickled down through the entire school. They had their own special way of entertaining themselves, humiliating those they deemed inferior. Street vendors were their favorite targets because they couldn't fight back without losing their livelihood. Kemi first encountered Biodun's group on her 3rd week of working. She was standing near the school gates during lunch break when she overheard them planning their next prank. "I am bored," Biodun announced to his friends. "Let's have some fun with the beggars outside." "What do you have in mind?" Temi asked, already giggling in anticipation. "Let's see how desperate they are," Biodun said with a cruel smile. "We'll pretend to buy something, then accidentally drop it and make them clean it up for free." Kemi's blood boiled as she listened, but she forced herself to remain calm. This was exactly the kind of behavior her father needed to know about. She watched as they approached an elderly man selling roasted corn. Biodun ordered 3 corn cobs, then accidentally knocked the man's small charcoal stove, scattering hot coals across the ground. "Oh no," Biodun said with mock concern. "How clumsy of me. You better clean that up quickly before someone gets hurt." The elderly man, afraid of losing his spot and knowing he couldn't afford to anger these wealthy children, scrambled to gather the hot coals with his bare hands, burning his fingers in the process. "Hurry up, old man," Fumi laughed. "We don't have all day." The man looked up at them with pleading eyes. "Please, I need to restart my fire to continue business. Maybe a small tip to help." Biodun's expression turned cold. "Tip? For your own clumsiness? You should be grateful we are not reporting you to the school authorities for creating a hazard." They walked away laughing, leaving the man to restart his business with burned hands and lost income. Kemi had to turn away to hide her tears of rage and shame. Rage at their cruelty, shame that she belonged to the same social class as these monsters. But this was just the beginning. Over the following days, she documented incident after incident. Biodun's group ordering food from vendors, eating it, then claiming it was spoiled and demanding their money back. Temi deliberately stepping on a shoe shiner's polishing cloth and demanding he wash her shoes as compensation. Fumi making a pure water seller count out change 3 times, claiming she couldn't trust people like her to count correctly. Dayo throwing trash at a street sweeper and telling him that's what you are paid for. Each incident was recorded in Kemi's memory with photographic clarity. She was building a case, documenting evidence of systemic cruelty that went far beyond teenage misbehavior. This was a culture of dehumanization that the school was not just tolerating but nurturing. But the incident that would change everything, the one that would finally push Kemi to reveal her true identity, was still to come. It was a particularly hot Thursday afternoon when Kemi encountered the worst of Biodun's cruelty. She had been selling water for nearly 2 months, and her presence had become familiar to the students. Some ignored her, a few bought from her regularly, But Biodun's groups had escalated their harassment with each passing week. On this day, Kemi was feeling ill. She had caught a slight fever the night before, but couldn't afford to miss a day of work. Her cover story required her to live solely on her hawking income, and she was taking the experiment seriously. Her head pounded as she balanced the tray of water sachets, and her hands shook slightly from weakness. She was standing in her usual spot when Biodun emerged from the school with his entourage. But today, he seemed particularly agitated. Unknown to Kemi, he had just been reprimanded by the school principal for poor grades, and his father had threatened to cut his allowance if his performance didn't improve. Biodun needed someone to take his frustrations out on. His eyes landed on Kemi, and a cruel smile spread across his face. "Well, well, if it isn't our resident beggar," he announced loudly, ensuring everyone within earshot could hear. "Still polluting our streets with your presence, I see." Kemi tried to move away, but Biodun stepped into her path. "Where do you think you're going? We are talking to you." "Please, sir, I don't want any trouble," Kemi said softly. Her voice was from illness. "Trouble?" Biodun laughed. "You think you can cause trouble? You are nothing but a dirty street rat." He reached into his bag and pulled out a bottle of expensive imported juice, worth at least 10 times what Kemi charged for water. "This is what real drink looks like," he said, waving it in front of her face. "Not the contaminated sewage you are selling." Then, with deliberate malice, he unscrewed the cap and poured the entire contents over Kemi's head. The sticky liquid ran down her face, soaking her hair and clothes. The crowd that had gathered gasped, some in shock, others in cruel amusement. But Biodun wasn't finished. "Now you are all sticky and dirty, even dirtier than before. But don't worry, I'll help you clean up." He grabbed one of the water sachets from her tray, tore it open and squeezed the contents over her head as well. "There," he said with satisfaction. "Free cleaning service. You should thank me." Kemi stood there, dripping wet, humiliated and shaking, not just from illness but from a rage so pure it threatened to consume her. The crowd was recording everything, their phones capturing her degradation for social media entertainment. "What's wrong?" Kemi taunted. "Cat got your tongue? Or are you finally realizing your place in this world?" Something inside Kemi snapped. 2 months of witnessing cruelty. 2 months of being treated as less than human. 2 months of documenting the systematic dehumanization of the poor. It all crystallized in this moment. She looked up at Biodun, water and juice still dripping from her face, and spoke in a voice that was quiet but carried a power that made several students step back. "You think you know who I am?" she said, her eyes burning with an intensity that made Biodun unconsciously take a half step backward. "You think you know what I am capable of? You think your father's money makes you untouchable?" She paused, letting the words sink in. The crowd had gone completely silent, sensing that something significant was happening. "But let me tell you something, Biodun Adebayo. Your father is a small fish in a very big pond, and someday, very soon, you are going to learn what real power looks like." Biodun recovered his composure and laughed, but it sounded forced. "Listen to her trying to threaten me. What are you going to do? Throw water at me? Tell your non-existent father on me?" Kemi smiled, a cold, knowing smile that sent chills down the spines of several observers. "I don't need to do anything. The universe has a way of correcting imbalances, and yours is coming." She bent down, picked up her empty water sachets with dignity. placed them back on her tray, and walked away with her head held high, leaving a crowd of confused and slightly unsettled students behind her. That night, in her small apartment, Kemi sat down and wrote her final report for her father. But first, she made a phone call. "Daddy," she said when Chief Okonkwo answered, "it is time. I have seen enough. Tomorrow, I want you to make the announcement about the new ownership of the school." And Daddy, "Yes, my dear. I want to be the one to deliver the news to the students personally." There was a pause on the other end. "Are you sure, Kemi? Once you reveal yourself, there is no going back. Your life will change." Kemi thought about the elderly counselor with burned hands, about all the vendors who had been humiliated and dehumanized, about the culture of cruelty that had been allowed to flourish unchecked. "I'm sure, Daddy, it is time they learned that actions have consequences, and it is time for justice." The next morning, Chief Okonkwo made the announcement to the media. Adeyemi Holdings had acquired Emerald Crown Academy and would be implementing immediate and comprehensive reforms. But the students wouldn't learn about the new ownership until later that day, in a special assembly that would change everything. Friday morning at Emerald Crown Academy began like any other day. Students arrived in their chauffeur-driven cars, servants carrying their bags, privileged one like expensive cologne. The news of the school's acquisition hadn't reached them yet. Chief Okonkwo had specifically requested that the announcement be delayed until he could address the entire school community personally. Biodun strutted through the hallways with his usual arrogance, recounting yesterday's humiliation of the water seller to anyone who would listen. "You should have seen her face," he bragged to a group of younger students. "Completely soaked and pathetic. These street people need to learn their place." What he didn't know was that several teachers and administrators had been quietly replaced overnight. Chief Okonkwo's advanced team had been working around the clock, implementing the first phase of reforms. New staff members, carefully selected for their integrity and commitment to character education, had been briefed on what they might witness and given clear instructions on how to respond. Kemi arrived at school that morning, not as a water seller, but in a chauffeur-driven Mercedes, dressed in a simple but elegant school uniform. She sat in the back seat, watching familiar faces through the tinted windows, knowing that in a few hours, everything would change. She had spent the night preparing her speech, choosing her words carefully. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice and education. The students needed to learn that their actions had consequences, that every person deserved dignity regardless of their economic status. At exactly 10 a.m., the school's public address system crackled to life with an announcement that made several students looked up in confusion. All students and staff are to report to the main auditorium immediately for a special announcement. Attendance is mandatory. Biodun rolled his eyes. Probably another boring lecture about academic excellence, he muttered to his friends. "Let's sit in the back so we can text during the speech." As the auditorium filled, whispers and speculations rippled through the crowd. The teachers looked unusually serious, and there were several unfamiliar faces among the staff. On the stage sat a distinguished man in an expensive suit whom nobody recognized, flanked by what appeared to be lawyers and administrators. Principal Adeniyi, looking unusually nervous, stepped up to the microphone. "Students and staff, I have an important announcement to make. As of yesterday, Emerald Crown Academy has been acquired by Adeyemi Holdings. one of Nigeria's largest conglomerates. I would like to introduce the new owner, Chief Adeyemi Okonkwo. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some students recognized the name. Adeyemi Holdings owned hotels, banks, real estate companies, and numerous other businesses across West Africa. This was serious money, the kind that made their parents' wealth look insignificant. Chief Okonkwo stood up, his presence commanding immediate attention. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of decades of business leadership. Young people of Emerald Crown Academy, he began. I have acquired this institution not because I needed another business venture, but because I believe in the transformative power of education. However, the education I am referring to goes beyond academics. It includes character, integrity, and the fundamental understanding that every human being deserves dignity and respect. Biodun shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Something about the man's tone suggested this wasn't going to be a typical welcome speech. Over the past 2 months, Chief Okonkwo continued, I have conducted a comprehensive evaluation of this school's culture. What I discovered was deeply touching. I found students who believe their parents' wealth gives them the right to humiliate and dehumanize others. I found a culture that tolerates and even encourages cruelty toward those perceived as lower in social status. The auditorium had gone completely silent. Several students were looking around nervously, wondering if their behavior had been reported. To understand the extent of this problem, I authorized a special investigation. Someone has been observing your behavior, documenting your actions, and reporting back to me. Someone who experienced firsthand the cruelty that had been allowed to flourish in this institution. Chief Okonkwo paused, letting the tension build. I would like to introduce you to that investigator now. She has spent 2 months living among you, seeing how you treat people you consider beneath your status. She has documented every act of kindness and every act of cruelty. Students of Emerald Crown Academy, please welcome my daughter and your new Deputy Director of Student Affairs, Ms. Kemi Okonkwo. The side door of the auditorium opened and Kemi walked in. She was no longer the humble water seller in faded clothes. She wore a crisp blazer. Her hair was styled professionally and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who belonged on that stage. But many students recognized her face immediately. The reaction was instantaneous and electric. Gasps echoed throughout the auditorium. Students turned to each other in shock and disbelief. Some pulled out their phones to compare her current appearance and the phones they had taken of her humiliation. But no one's reaction was more dramatic than Biodun's. His face went completely white, then flushed red with embarrassment and fear. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, and his hands began to shake visibly. No, he whispered to himself. No, no, no. This can't be happening. Kemi stood at the podium, looking out at hundreds of faces staring back at her in various states of shock, disbelief, and dawning horror. She took a moment to locate Biodun in the crowd, meeting his terrified gaze with calm, steady eyes. Good morning, Emerald Crown Academy, she said, her voice clear and strong. Many of you know me, though you knew me by a different name. For the past 2 months, you have known me as Kemi the water seller, the girl you ignored, mocked, and humiliated, the one you treated as less than human because you thought she was poor. She paused, letting her words sink in. Several students were now frantically scrolling through their phones, pulling up videos and photos they had taken of her. I want to thank those of you who showed kindness during my time among you. There were a few, very few, who treated me with basic human dignity. You will be recognized and rewarded for your character. She turned her gaze specifically toward Biodun's section of the auditorium. But I also want to address those of you who use my perceived poverty as an excuse to exercise cruelty. You saw there would be no consequences for your actions because you believed I was powerless. Kemi reached into her blazer and pulled out a small tablet. I have documented every interaction, every insult, every act of cruelty that occurred over the past 2 months. I have video evidence, witness statements, and detailed reports of behavior that is not just morally reprehensible, but also potentially criminal. The auditorium was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming. Several students were crying. Others looked like they might be sick. Biodun Adebayo, Kemi called out, her voice carrying across the silent auditorium. Please stand up. Biodun remained frozen in his seat, his face now completely pale. His friends had moved away from him as if his shame was contagious. I said, stand up, Biodun. Trembling, Biodun slowly rose to his feet, his legs barely supporting him. Yesterday, you poured juice and water over my head in front of dozens of people. You filmed it for your entertainment. You called me a dirty street rat and told me I should be grateful for your attention. Kemi's voice remained calm, but her eyes burned with intensity. Do you remember what you said when I warned you that actions have consequences? Biodun's mouth moved, but no sound came out. You laughed. Kemi continued. You said I was nothing. You asked what my non-existent father could do to you. Well, Biodun, let me answer that question. She pressed a button on her tablet and the last screen behind her lit up a video. Security footage from the previous day showing Biodun's assault on her in crystal clear detail. The sound was perfect, capturing every cruel word, every laugh from his friends, every moment of her humiliation. When the video ended, Kemi continued, my father, Chief Adeyemi Okonkwo, now owns the school. Your parents' school fees pay his staff. Your family's social status means nothing to him because his wealth and influence dwarf theirs completely. She turned to address the entire school auditorium. But this isn't just about one incident or one student. This is about a culture that needs to change. Over the next few minutes, I am going to call out several students who have repeatedly demonstrated that they believe money gives them the right to dehumanize others. The tablet in her hand seemed to glow with power as she began reading names. Each student she called had to stand and face the judgment of their peers as she recounted their specific acts of cruelty, all documented, all witnessed, all undeniable. Temi Ogundimu, you made a shoe shiner lick your boots clean after you deliberately stepped in mud. Fumi Adeleke, you threw hot soup on a food vendor and demanded a refund, claiming the food made you sick. Dayo Fashola, you urinated on a street sweeper's broom and told him it was an improvement. One by one, she called them out. Each revelation was shocking than the last. The students not named sat in horrified silence, realizing that every cruel act they thought was private had been observed and recorded. But Kemi wasn't finished with Biodun. Biodun Adebayo, she said, turning back to him, you are hereby expelled from Emerald Crown Academy, effective immediately. Your parents will be informed that you are no longer welcome on these premises. Security will escort you out as soon as this assembly ends. Biodun finally found his voice. You can't do this, he shouted, desperation making his voice crack. My father is important. He will sue you. He will destroy you. Kemi smiled, the same cold smile she had given him the day before. Your father is a state commissioner. My father owns companies in 12 countries. Your father drives a government-issued car. My father owns the dealership that sold it to the government. Your father earns a government salary. My father pays more in taxes than your father earns in 5 years. The brutal truth of the power differential was sinking in, not just for Biodun, but for everyone in the auditorium. You want to know the difference between your father and mine, Biodun? Your father taught you that power means the right to humiliate others. My father taught me that power means the responsibility to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Chief Okonkwo stood up from his seat and joined his daughter at the podium. The students I have heard named today will be suspended pending a full investigation. Their parents will be called in for meetings where they will watch video evidence of their children's behavior. Some of these incidents may be referred to law enforcement, as assault and harassment are crimes, regardless of the age or social status of the perpetrator. He paused, letting the gravity of the situation settle. But more importantly, this school will be implementing a new program. Every student will spend 1 day per month working alongside service providers, cleaners, food vendors, security guards, maintenance staff. You will learn that these are not lesser people. They are the foundation upon which your privileged lives are built. The assembly continued for another 30 minutes as Chief Okonkwo outlined the comprehensive reforms that would transform Emerald Crown Academy. But for most students, the words were background noise to the shock of realizing that their cruelty had been witnessed, documented, and would now be published. As the assembly concluded and students began to file out, Biodun remained standing in his row, tears streaming down his face. The boy who had walked into school that morning, believing himself untouchable, was now facing expulsion, legal consequences, and social disgrace. Kemi watched him from the stage, feeling no triumph but a deep sadness. This was what unchecked privilege and poor character education created. Young people so divorced from empathy that they saw cruelty as entertainment. But the reckoning was just beginning. The news of what happened at Emerald Crown Academy spread through Lagos social media like wildfire. Videos of Kemi's revelation, combined with the documented evidence of student cruelty, created a social media storm that dominated conversations across Nigeria for weeks. The hashtag Emerald Crown Exposed began trending within hours, with thousands of people sharing their own experiences of mistreatment by privileged children. Parents began examining their own children's behavior, wondering what cruelty they might be enabling through their silence and overindulgence. But the immediate aftermath was most devastating for the students who had been called out during the assembly. Biodun Adebayo's world collapsed overnight. The video of him pouring juice on Kemi went viral. But now, viewers knew the full context, that he was a wealthy student humiliating the daughter of an even wealthier man. The comments were brutal, with people calling him everything from entitled brat to future criminal. His father, Honorable Adebayo, arrived at the school within an hour of the assembly, his political instincts telling him to contain the damage immediately. But when he stormed into Chief Okonkwo's office, expecting to intimidate his way out of the situation, he found himself face to face with a man whose quiet power made his own political influence seem trivial. Honorable Adebayo, Chief Okonkwo said calmly, not bothering to stand from behind his mahogany desk. I've been expecting you. This is outrageous. Honorable Adebayo blustered, his face red with indignation. You set up my son. This whole thing was a trap. Your son trapped himself. Chief Okonkwo replied evenly. My daughter simply provided him with an opportunity to show his true character. He chose cruelty. She's just a child playing dress up. You can't seriously think. Chief Okonkwo pressed a button on his desk, and the well-mounted screen displayed Biodun's assault on Kemi in high definition. Your son committed assault in front of dozens of witnesses. He filmed it himself. In some countries, this will be prosecuted as a hate crime. As the video played, showing his son's cruelty in vivid detail, Honorable Adebayo's bluster began to deflate. This wasn't a case he could spin or a situation he could politically maneuver his way out of. What do you want? He asked quietly, his voice stripped of his earlier aggression. I want your son to learn that actions have consequences. Real consequences. He will be expelled, and this incident will remain on his permanent record. Any school that considers accepting him will see this video. Honorable Adebayo's face went pale. You are destroying his future over a childish prank? No, Chief Okonkwo said firmly. I am giving him a chance to build a better future by learning from his mistakes. The question is whether you will help him learn or continue enabling his cruelty. Meanwhile, in the school corridors, the other students were dealing with their own reckonings. Kemi Ogundimu found herself surrounded by classmates who had once feared her social influence, now openly mocking her documented cruelty. The girl who had made others lick her boots was now being called Princess P. Boots by former admirers. Her mother, Mrs. Ogundimu, arrived at the school that afternoon, having seen the video circulating on social media. Unlike Honorable Adebayo, she came not to defend but to apologize. I am so sorry, she said to Kemi, tears streaming down her face. I have failed as a mother. I gave my daughter everything except the most important thing, a conscience. Kemi looked at the woman with compassion. It is not too late, Mrs. Ogundimu. Temi is still young. She can still learn to be better. What can I do? How can I fix this? Start by having her work with the people she has mistreated. Let her clean shoes for a month. Let her understand what it feels like to be on the other side of her cruelty. The story was similar for the other families. Parents who had previously dismissed reports of their children's behavior as kids being kids were now forced to confront video evidence of systematic cruelty. Some, like Mrs. Ogundimu, were horrified and sought to make amends. Others, like Honorable Adebayo, remained in denial, blaming everyone but themselves and their children. 3 weeks after the assembly, Emerald Crown Academy was unrecognizable. The culture of casual cruelty has been replaced by something entirely different, a combination of fear, respect, and for some students, genuine remorse. The monthly service program that Chief Okonkwo had announced was implemented immediately. Every student, regardless of their family's wealth or status, spent 1 day each month working alongside the school's service staff. They cleaned classrooms, served in the canteen, maintained the grounds, and most importantly, listened to the stories of the people they had previously ignored or mistreated. Kemi, now openly serving as Deputy Director of Student Affairs, supervised these programs personally. She watched as students who had never cleaned up after themselves learned to mop floors and scrub toilets. She saw the shock on their faces when they realized how much work went into maintaining their comfortable environments. But the most powerful transformation came from the individual encounters between students and the people they had wronged. Fumi Adeleke, the girl who had thrown hot soup on a food vendor, found herself working in the school kitchen under the supervision of Mrs. Aduni, the same woman she had abused. For the first few hours, Fumi was sullen and resentful, clearly considering the work beneath her. But as the day progressed, she began to see Mrs. Aduni as a person rather than as a servant. She learned that the woman had 3 children, was working to pay for their education, and had burns on her arms from years of cooking in difficult conditions. "Why do you do this work if it is so hard?" Fumi asked her during their lunch break. Mrs. Aduni smiled sadly. "Because my children need to eat and they need to go to school. Because even hard work is better than no work. Because I have dignity in providing for my family, even if people like you used to think I had no dignity at all." The words hit Fumi like a physical blow. For the first time, she understood that her actions had consequences for real people with real feelings and real struggles. By the end of the day, Fumi was in tears. "I am sorry," she whispered to Mrs. Aduni. "I am so sorry for what I did to you." Mrs. Aduni looked at the crying teenager and saw not the cruel girl who had humiliated her, but a child who was finally learning to be human. "I forgive you, my dear, but you must promise me never treat another person the way you treated me." Similar scenes played out across the school as students confronted the human cost of their previous behavior. Not all of them were immediately transformed. Some remained defiant. Others were only sorry they had been caught. But enough students experienced genuine remorse that the school's culture began to shift fundamentally. While his fellow classmates were learning empathy through supervised service, Biodun Adebayo was experiencing a different kind of education. His expulsion from Emerald Crown had made him toxic to other elite schools. None wanted to risk association with a boy whose cruelty had become a viral symbol of privilege entitlement. His father, still in denial about the severity of the situation, enrolled him in a private tutoring program, intending to keep him isolated until the scandal died down. But isolation only made Biodun's problems worse. Without his circle of enablers and admirers, he was forced to confront the reality of who he had become. The turning point came when he saw a street vendor being harassed by other teenagers near his family's home in Ikoyi. The scene was eerily familiar. A group of privileged kids mocking and humiliating someone they saw as beneath them. But now, instead of being the perpetrator, Biodun was an observer. For the first time, he saw his behavior reflected in others and it horrified him. The vendor was an elderly woman selling oranges, and the teenagers were dumping her fruit on the ground while filming her distress. Biodun watched for several minutes, paralyzed by the recognition of his own past actions. Then, surprising himself, he stepped forward. "Stop," he said quietly. The teenagers turned to him, recognizing him as the infamous Emerald Crown bully from social media. "Look who is talking," one of them laughed. "Aren't you the guy who got exposed for bullying that rich girl?" The word stung, but Biodun continued. "Yes, that's me. And I'm telling you to stop because I know where this leads. I know what it feels like to be on the other side." He knelt down and began picking up the scattered oranges, helping the elderly woman gather her fruit. The teenagers, confused by this unexpected turn of events, gradually dispersed. The woman looked at Biodun with suspicion. "Why are you helping me?" Biodun paused. an orange in his hand, and realized he didn't have a good answer. Because he said finally, I need to start somewhere. 6 months later, after the Emerald Crown expose, the impact of Kemi's experiments had spread far beyond the walls of one elite school. Parents across Lagos were reassessing their children's behavior and their own parenting styles. Schools were implementing character education programs. Even government officials were discussing legislation to address bullying and harassment. But perhaps the most significant change was in the students themselves. Temi Ogundimu had become one of the school's most active volunteers in community service programs. She spent her weekends working with street children, teaching them basic literacy skills. Her former victims had become her teachers, showing her what resilience and dignity looked like even in the face of poverty. Funmi Adeleke had started a scholarship fund for the children of service workers, using her allowance and convincing her father to match her contributions. She worked closely with Mrs. Aduni, who had become something of a mentor to her. Dayo Fashola, perhaps the most transformed of all, had convinced his parents to hire several street vendors as employees in their various businesses, providing them with steady income and dignity. The students who had shown kindness to Kemi during her undercover period were publicly recognized and given leadership roles in the new school government, proving that character, not wealth, would determine status at the new Emerald Crown Academy. As for Kemi herself, the experience had changed her as much as it had changed her classmates. She had gained a deep understanding of inequality and injustice that no amount of privileged education could have provided. She carried herself differently now, still confident, but with a humility and empathy that made her a natural leader. Her father watched her growth with pride and concern. Are you happy with how it turned out? He asked her one evening as they reviewed the school's progress reports. Kemi thought for a moment. I am happy that we stopped a culture of cruelty. I am happy that those vendors and social workers are being treated with dignity now. But I am sad that it took such an extreme measure to teach basic human decency. And what about Biodun? He hasn't tried to return to school. Kemi was quiet for a moment. I think about him often. I hope he is learning, growing, becoming better. But that's his journey now. I can't save everyone. I can only create opportunities for people to save themselves. A year after the events of Emerald Crown Academy, Lagos hosted an international conference on youth leadership and social responsibility. Kemi Okonkwo, now recognized as one of Nigeria's most influential young adults, was invited to deliver the keynote address. The auditorium was packed with educators, policymakers, and young people from across Africa. As Kemi took the stage, she saw familiar faces in the audience. Former classmates who had been transformed by their experiences, teachers who had learned to prioritize character over grades, and parents who had rediscovered the importance of raising decent human beings. But in the back row, partially hidden in shadow, sat a young man she almost didn't recognize. Biodun Adebayo had grown thinner, more serious. He wore simple clothes instead of designer labels, and his eyes held a gravity that hadn't been there before. When Kemi began her speech, she spoke about the power of second chances, the importance of accountability, and the possibility of redemption for even the cruelest among us. A year ago, I learned that privilege without responsibility is not a blessing. It is a curse. It curses the privileged with moral blindness and curses their victims with suffering. But I also learned that people can change, systems can be reformed, and justice can be gentle while still being firm. As she concluded her speech, she made eye contact with Biodun. He didn't smile, but he nodded slightly. Acknowledgement, perhaps even a thank you. After the conference, Biodun approached her during the reception. "Miss Kemi," he said formally, his voice lacking the arrogance that had once defined it. "Hello, Biodun. How are you?" "I'm learning," he said carefully. "I wanted you to know that I have been volunteering at a homeless shelter. I am trying to understand what I became, and more importantly, trying to become something better." Kemi studied his face, looking for signs of genuine change versus manipulation. What she saw was a young man who had been broken down and was slowly, carefully building himself back up. "That is good to hear," she said. "Real change is hard work, but it's the most important work any of us can do." Biodun nodded. "I know I can never undo what I did, but I want you to know that every day I try to be the opposite of who I was. And every day I remember that actions have consequences. Something you taught me when I thought I was untouchable." As he walked away, Kemi felt a sense of completion. The experiment had succeeded beyond her father's original intentions. It hadn't just exposed cruelty, it had created the opportunity for transformation. The street hawker who had been laughed at by the rich kids had indeed owned their school. But more importantly, she had helped them discover something more valuable than any ownership: the possibility of becoming truly wealthy in character, compassion, and humanity. And in the end, that was the most valuable lesson of all. This story serves as a reminder that true wealth lies not in material possessions, but in how we treat one another. Every person, regardless of their economic status, deserves dignity and respect. And everyone, regardless of their past mistakes, deserves the opportunity to change and grow into a better version of themselves.